It started, as so many things do, in a moment nobody planned. Sam Whitaker had a habit of finding strange corners of the city when his head buzzed too much. At 23, barely out of the university bubble and now lost in the middle of a second failed startup and a relationship that felt more like habit than heat, he had no answers, no compass. He walked. He walked because it forced the anxiety to find rhythm. That's when he saw her, across from the used bookstore he didn't remember entering, framed by the dim orange street lamp glow, eyes squinting at a folded flyer like it owed her money. She wasn't beautiful in the way Instagram sold it, no fillers, no filters, no tight smile meant to suggest sex without saying it. She was real. Her coat was too big, practical, stained at the collar, and she wore shoes meant for walking, not being looked at. Her eyes, dark, slow-moving, took in the world like it was a thing to be negotiated, not absorbed. She looked tired in the way people look when they've lived long enough to know better. She looked alive in a way no one his age ever did. He said something stupid, something about the bookstore's cat. Yes, there was a real bookstore cat, and she gave him a glance like she was deciding whether to acknowledge a ghost or ignore a stray. He smiled anyway. That was his thing, reckless, inappropriate grins. She looked him over, 20-something, hoodie too clean, hands in pockets, probably a college kid just out fishing for stories to feel clever about, and said nothing. But then it rained. Not the kind of rain that stirs drama, just enough to ruin a walk home and smudge the ink on whatever she was holding. She looked at it like it mattered and cursed softly. He offered her his umbrella, cheap and half-broken, but still useful. She hesitated. Pride clashed with practicality in her jawline before she muttered a reluctant thanks. They stood awkwardly together, rain ticking around them like static. "You lost?" he asked finally, not because it mattered, but because silence always made him nervous. She gave him that look again. "No. Just deciding whether to go to this poetry thing." "You read poetry?" "I used to." There was a pause there, something waited, so he pushed lightly. "I write." "Well, sometimes. When I'm not pretending I have a career." That got her mouth to twitch. "Pretending is half of being young," she said, and for a second, the sarcasm slipped and something gentler stood in its place. He walked her to the building, some little arts venue that probably hosted open mics and sad jazz. She didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. But just before the door closed between them, he handed her a folded piece of paper. "His number?" "No. A line. Poetry is the lie we tell because the truth is too clumsy." He didn't look back. He didn't expect her to call. 3 days later, she did. They met again in a diner no one under 40 willingly entered. Laminated menus. Coffee that smelled like cigarette ghosts. She was already there, sipping tea, eyes guarded. "Why?" she asked without ceremony, skipping hello. "Why what?" "Why me?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at her. No makeup. Hair pulled back like she gave up trying halfway through. That same coat, though cleaner. She wasn't hiding anything, and he liked that. "Because you didn't smile the first time I met you. Not like the kind of smile you're supposed to wear. You look like someone who's forgotten how, not someone trying to fake it." She looked at him like he'd cracked a code and then resented him for it. Then she said something he wouldn't forget. "I used to teach literature. Before I stopped believing in my own taste." He asked what happened. She said marriage, kids, divorce, the usual detour through a life she didn't recognize. Now she proofread grant applications and never finished the book she started. He asked her name. "Clara." Just Clara. No performance. They saw each other again the next week, then the next. Not dates, not yet, just coffee, gallery exhibits where they said almost nothing, walks in parks neither of them had reason to visit. It wasn't romantic. It was curiosity on slow boil. He watched her start to uncoil. She watched him keep his distance while creeping closer. Then it happened. They were walking along the pier after a movie neither of them liked but both pretended to for the other's sake. Wind was slapping hair across her face. She was laughing at something he said, genuine, ugly laughter that made her snort, and he saw it. The smile. Not polite. Not masked. It caught him off guard. She noticed. It scared her. "Don't look at me like that," she said sharply. "Like what?" "Like I'm new." "You are," he said. That shut her up. But she didn't walk away. The next day, he left something on her doorstep. He didn't ring the bell. Inside the envelope was a drawing, charcoal, rough, done by his hand. Her face mid-laugh, eyes closed, mouth open, no armor. Below it, a single line. "The smile you forgot belongs to you." She stood there on the porch, the wind catching her sleeves. And for the first time in years, no students, no husband, no masks, Clara cried. But it wasn't sadness. It was recognition. And she smiled again. They met now in secret, not because of the thrill, but because the world around them wasn't built to accept something like this without turning it into something else entirely. Clara wasn't ashamed, but she was cautious in a way that Sam didn't yet understand. She had responsibilities, a teenage daughter, a career built back brick by brick after years spent apologizing for being too much or too little for someone else. Sam had freedom, maybe too much of it, the kind that starts out feeling like a gift and gradually turns into an empty room. He could afford risk. She couldn't. But the problem was, he wasn't a risk to her. He was something that made sense in the quiet hours, in the gaps between everything she had to carry. At first, it was a game of timing, early mornings when the city was still too sleepy to watch, backstreet cafes with old booths and broken jukeboxes, days off disguised as errands. She would say things like, "I don't belong in your world," and he would shrug and say, "It's not mine either." But there was a clock running somewhere, ticking behind her eyes, reminding her that nothing borrowed stays forever. It wasn't just the age difference. It was how everyone around them would read into it, paint her as a woman clinging to youth, paint him as a kid chasing experience. They would strip it of every honest part and call it something cheap. One afternoon, while they were walking near his old campus, Clara stopped mid-step and turned sharply. "You can't kiss me here. No one's even around. It doesn't matter. You don't get it. You never had to sit across from someone pretending not to judge you. I don't care if they judge. I do." And he finally saw it. Not fear, but memory. She had been through public failure before. A husband who left without warning, friends who chose sides, whispers that bled into her workplace. She rebuilt everything alone, and the idea of giving them a new reason to talk made her skin itch. She wasn't scared of loving him. She was scared of being turned into someone else's story again. Sam didn't push, but that night, alone in his apartment, he stared at his phone, thumb hovering over her name, wondering if he was being selfish or just honest. He told himself this was different from every other thing he'd done. He told himself she saw him for who he was, not who he might become. But then came the phone call. He didn't recognize the number at first. He answered casually, thinking it was a delivery. The voice on the other end was slow and sharp, like someone rehearsing each word. "I saw you. At the bookstore. With her." Sam froze. He stepped into the hallway like that would somehow change the air. "Who is this?" "You don't know me. But I know her. And I know you." There was a pause, then a rustle, then silence, as if the person was deciding how far to go. "She's not who you think she is. And this, whatever this is, it won't end well for either of you. Especially her." Then the line went dead. He stood there for a while, phone still pressed to his ear, heart doing something between racing and stopping. He didn't know whether to call her, warn her, protect her, or disappear. When he finally texted her, he just wrote, "We need to talk. Someone called me. Said they saw us." She didn't reply that night. The next morning, she was already sitting in his building's stairwell, hands clasped tight, eyes red. She looked at him like she was waiting for him to be angry, or distant, or scared off. "I think I know who it was," she said, voice low. "Who?" "Someone from the school. An old colleague." I used to teach his daughter. We had a disagreement years ago about a student he wanted passed through. He's the type who waits. Who keeps things. And now he thinks he has something to use. Sam crouched in front of her, searching her face for anything that suggested regret. Is this where you tell me we should stop? She blinked slowly, then shook her head, not quickly, but with weight. No. But this is where I tell you it might get harder. People don't like when you live outside the rules they wrote. He nodded. Then something hard flickered behind his eyes. Let them talk. Let them whisper. I'm not walking away from you. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that comes with knowing too much. She reached out and touched his face, gently, like it was the last thing in the world still soft. I just don't want you to become collateral for something I should have handled long ago. He held her hand there, firm against his cheek. I'm not afraid of being with you. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. I am. They sat like that for a while. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just two people trying to measure the weight of what they were carrying and whether they could do it without breaking. She kissed him then, quietly, without asking. And for a moment, everything else fell quiet too. But they both knew the silence wouldn't last. The calls didn't stop, but they didn't come often enough to trace. Sometimes it was just breathing. Other times, clipped phrases, you're being watched, or you don't belong with her, or she'll drag you down. Sam kept each one to himself for days at a time, not because he wanted to protect Clara from them, but because he didn't want to give the voice more space in their world than it already had. He recorded them, tried to get numbers, logged the times and dates, but nothing added up. He stopped answering unknown numbers entirely. Clara knew something was happening. She didn't ask directly, but her eyes scanned his face more often, as if reading for cracks. They spent more time in his place now, rarely outside, rarely among people. Even when they ventured out, it was always with space between them, never touching, never too close, two people walking in rhythm without letting the world see the beat. He missed the small things, her hand in his coat pocket, the way her shoulder tilted into him during cold walks, the way she used to laugh without glancing over her shoulder. They had a pattern now, not romantic in the public sense, but real. She would come over on Thursdays after work, carrying a half-empty tote filled with tea and essays she pretended she still needed to read. He would cook, mostly pasta or whatever didn't take focus. They didn't need entertainment. They needed space to speak. Their nights became longer, quieter, full of stories neither had told anyone else. She told him about the time she locked herself in her car outside her ex-husband's new house and cried for an hour without ever knocking. He told her about the time he almost left the country without telling his parents because he didn't know how to admit he'd failed. She listened without pity, and he watched her like he was still learning what a person looked like after they'd stopped performing. One night, after she'd fallen asleep on his couch, he sat next to her with a notebook on his lap and just wrote. Not poems, not stories, just moments. He wrote the way her voice slowed down when she spoke about her daughter. He wrote the way she avoided mirrors in the mornings. He wrote the way she looked out windows like she was remembering something instead of watching. And then, for the first time, he wrote her name like it belonged to a page and not just a person. The next day, Clara called from work. She didn't say hello. She didn't greet him with warmth. Her voice was sharp and clipped. Were you near the North Campus coffee shop this morning? He paused, trying to remember. Yeah, I grabbed a coffee before heading downtown. Why? There's a picture. A picture of what? Of you. Walking. Alone, but it's clear. And someone sent it to my department email with the subject line, where was he going? No message. No name. Just the photo. His grip on the phone tightened. They're watching you now too. Yeah. Do you want me to come over? No. I need to think. He waited a few hours before calling back. She answered on the second ring. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shut you out earlier. You didn't. You're just used to being alone when things go bad. You notice everything. I'm not guessing. I've been you. That night, she came over without calling. She was holding a bottle of wine she hadn't opened and looked like she hadn't slept. She stood in his doorway like she didn't know if she belonged anymore. He stepped aside, let her in, and for once didn't ask her anything. They sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her, his stretched out, the air thick but not angry. "There's something I haven't told you," she said suddenly. He turned, waiting. "Back when I first started teaching, there was a rumor about me and a student. It wasn't true, but it stuck around long enough to cost me a year. That's why I transferred departments. That's why I avoid faculty events. I thought if I kept my head down, worked quietly, I could erase it with time." "Did you ever figure out who started it?" "I have theories. Doesn't matter. What matters is, if this becomes public, they'll say it confirms everything. They won't care about details." He didn't say anything at first. Then, "So what do we do?" She leaned her head back, eyes on the ceiling. "We keep living. Quietly. But we stop hiding from ourselves." Later that week, they went to a museum. Late, near closing. Sparse crowd. No students, no colleagues, no familiar faces. They stood before an abstract painting neither of them liked, mostly because it gave them something to mock. As they turned to leave, a man in a gray coat brushed past them. Tall, thin, early 60s. Clara stiffened. Sam caught the change. "Who was that?" I think he used to sit on the tenure review board." "You sure he saw us?" "I don't think it matters." But it did. Because the next day, someone sent a typed letter to Clara's department. No return address. No direct accusation. Just a paragraph. "There are concerns regarding one of your staff and her conduct with a former student or a current one. The relationship is personal in nature and may pose ethical questions, especially given past complaints. Anonymous sources suggest further observation is warranted." She read it alone in her office. Then she burned it. When she told Sam, she didn't cry. She didn't panic. "We're being watched," she said. "I know." And then came the words neither of them wanted to say out loud. "How long can we keep this going?" The question stayed between them like unfinished business. They didn't answer it, didn't push it aside, just carried it into everything they did. Every meeting felt temporary. Every silence lasted longer than it used to. They didn't talk about the letter again, not directly, but Clara changed her routines. She stopped going to the staff lounge. She avoided walking near Sam's side of town. She said she needed to focus, but he could hear the shift in her tone. It wasn't just about being cautious. She was preparing herself for something he couldn't name. The calls had stopped, or at least slowed down, but the quiet didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like someone waiting. Sam felt the weight of it every morning, scrolling through his phone, half expecting some message, some news, something irreversible. He was working freelance now, mostly design jobs and editing work that paid late and kept him disconnected. It gave him freedom but not peace. Some days he'd catch himself staring at her texts, wondering how long it would take for her to decide that surviving was more important than being with him. They hadn't spoken in 3 days when she messaged him about the wedding. It was a distant cousin, nothing formal, just a backyard ceremony, afternoon gathering, not many people. She said it quickly, like it wasn't a big deal. He said yes because it was the first time she'd mentioned anything personal in a week. They drove separately. She insisted on that. Said it was easier that way. He got there first, parked behind a row of hedges, waited in the car until she arrived. When she walked up the driveway in a plain black dress and no jewelry, he realized she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just trying to be invisible. Inside, it was loud. Kids running around in shoes too big, plastic cups of cheap wine, the smell of roasted chicken and sweat under floral perfume. They stayed close but didn't touch. She introduced him only as a friend. No one asked questions at first. He smiled politely, nodded, watched her interact with relatives who clearly hadn't seen her in years. She was good at this surface talk, vague details, shifting conversations away from herself. He watched her laugh at things that didn't amuse her, answer questions without revealing anything, and realized she'd been doing this much longer than he thought. An hour in, someone finally asked. An aunt, maybe. Short hair, red lipstick too bright. She leaned in, not unkindly, and said, "So how long have you two been seeing each other?" Clara froze, not visibly, but enough that Sam saw it. She smiled and said, "We're just friends." He's an artist. Needed help with some grant language. The woman nodded too quickly, didn't believe it, turned away before the answer finished. Sam said nothing. He didn't need to. It was all over Clara's face, the calculation, the pull back, the need to keep the line clean. Later, after the couple's first dance, after enough people had left and the energy had dulled into tired conversation, Clara took Sam's hand and pulled him toward the back patio. They stood by the edge of a fire pit, smoke curling toward the trees, soft music drifting through the open windows. Her voice was low, steady. "I'm tired." Of today? Of pretending to be less than I am. He looked at her and saw the exhaustion, not physical, but something built over years of making herself palatable to everyone but herself. Then don't. You don't understand. You still think this is just about whether people approve. For me, it's about whether I lose everything. You're not going to lose everything. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned away, pulled out her phone, and showed him a message. It was from her daughter. "Mom, someone posted a thread online about you and a younger guy. It's all over campus forums. I didn't believe it, but are you okay?" Sam read it twice. "Did you respond?" "No. What would I even say?" The sound of laughter floated from inside the house, jarring against the tension between them. Sam didn't know what to say. He felt responsible, but not guilty. They had chosen this together. But he hadn't known how much she was risking. "Not really. Let's just leave," he said. They didn't say goodbye to anyone. Just got in their separate cars and drove. He followed her, a few cars behind, through side streets and empty intersections. When they reached his apartment, she didn't park. She rolled down her window and said, "I can't stay." "You don't have to stay. Just come in for a minute." "I shouldn't have brought you there." "It was stupid." "No, it wasn't. You wanted me to be part of your world. I wanted to see if I could. And now? I don't know." He stepped closer, leaned down so their eyes met. "Then come inside and let's figure it out." She looked away, like the decision was already made. "Not tonight." And then she drove off, slowly, as if unsure of the road, but certain about the direction. The next morning, a message arrived on his phone. No name. No greeting. "She's being investigated. You should leave her before you make it worse." He didn't reply. He stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. 3 hours later, he showed up at her department office, uninvited. The receptionist hesitated but didn't stop him. He walked in just as Clara stepped out of a meeting room. Faculty members stood nearby, frozen mid-sentence. He didn't care. He walked up to her and said, clearly, firmly, in front of everyone, "I'm not hiding anymore. If anyone has something to say it now." Clara stood still, eyes locked on his, her expression unreadable. Someone dropped a pen. No one spoke. And in that thick silence, something shifted. She reached out, took his hand, and didn't let go. There were no immediate consequences. The world didn't explode. No one dragged Clara into a hearing that day, no one confronted Sam outside the building, and no one threw out accusations in the moment. But everything changed. Conversations slowed when she entered rooms. Invitations that used to come by habit stopped arriving. Emails she would have received automatically now arrived with someone else's name in the recipient line. Meetings were rescheduled without notice. Comments were made not to her, but just within hearing distance. Sam saw it first, before she said anything, in the way her posture shifted from confidence to caution, in the way she looked at her phone after every meeting as if expecting something final. Sam kept showing up. He didn't stop visiting, didn't wait for her to ask. He brought lunch, printed drafts of his work for her to critique, asked for nothing in return. He could see the pressure building, but she never said the words. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. But she was tired, and there was a look in her eyes now that hadn't been there before, something sharp and resigned. When he asked if she wanted space, she shook her head. When he asked if she wanted to leave everything and start over somewhere else, she laughed, not because it was funny, but because it wasn't possible. Then came the formal inquiry. A scheduled internal review. Not public, not official in the legal sense, but designed to document concerns and make decisions quietly. It was presented as a routine check. Clara was handed a folder with printouts of forum threads, anonymous messages, and a list of dates where she and Sam had been seen together in public. Her supervisor told her that no conclusion had been reached yet, that this was just a step in protocol. Clara thanked him without reacting. She went home that night and didn't respond to any of Sam's messages. The next morning, she knocked on his door before sunrise. He opened it half asleep, eyes adjusting to the hallway light. She stood there without her coat, holding a letter in one hand and her phone in the other. I wrote a statement. Statement for what? For the review. I want you to read it. He stepped aside and let her in. She sat at his table and unfolded the page. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't break. It says everything. That we met after I had already left teaching. That you were never my student. That we began seeing each other as adults. I included dates, locations, even the name of the first cafe. Sam listened quietly. I also said I wouldn't answer questions about my private life beyond that. They can assume what they want. But I won't let them write the story for me. Do you think they'll accept it? They'll do what they want either way. But I needed to put it down in my words. He nodded slowly, letting it settle. Then I want to write one too. She looked at him, unsure. For them? No. For you. He sat across from her, pulled out his notebook, and began to write. It wasn't long, barely a paragraph. When he was done, he handed it to her. It said, "You didn't make me fall in love with you. I did that on my own. And I'll keep doing it, even if no one else agrees. I don't care how they explain it. I care that it's real. And that you didn't run when you had every reason to." She folded the note and placed it in her bag. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. But she stayed at his apartment that day, not to hide, not for comfort, but because she didn't want to be anywhere else. A week later, the review ended without a conclusion. There were no findings, no punishments, but also no relief. Clara was advised to maintain professional boundaries and avoid interactions that might give the appearance of impropriety. She was offered a lateral move to a less visible role. She didn't refuse. She didn't argue. She accepted the shift and handed in her new office keys the same day. Sam waited outside. She handed him a box filled with books and loose papers. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No. But I'm not broken either." They drove to the bookstore where they first met. It was still there, still faded, still ignoring time. They sat in the back, surrounded by half-sorted shelves, and drank coffee from mismatched mugs. She looked older that day, but not in the way people meant it. She looked worn, aware, and completely finished with pretending. "This isn't a movie," she said suddenly. "I know. There's no perfect ending. No one standing and clapping because we chose each other. I didn't want that anyway." She turned toward him and asked the one thing he hadn't expected. "Do you think we should stop?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, really looked, the same way he had when he first saw her laugh without force. No. But I think we could. If we had to. If it meant you could be free. She held his gaze, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she nodded once, slow and deliberate. Maybe one day. Not now. They left the bookstore in silence. He walked her to her car, watched her drive off again, not with sadness but with the weight of everything they'd survived. He didn't call that night. She didn't text the next morning. A week passed. Then another. When they finally met again, it wasn't planned. She was at a public reading, sitting in the back row alone. He had been invited by a friend, unaware she'd be there. Their eyes met across the room. He sat beside her without asking. She didn't say a word. The reading began. They listened. And they stayed.